Hello, this is your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheatley here again, back for another episode of the History of Comic Books podcast, this time the history of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has been one of the most successful comic books in recent memory. Since their creation in the mid-'80s, they have expanded from their successful comic book series to movies, cartoons, video games, and toy lines, rivaling that of Superman and Spider-Man from the more mainstream DC and Marvel. Their success is the envy and inspiration of every independent creator in recent decades, but funny enough, when their creators Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird came up with them, it was originally just a joke. Kevin Eastman was born on May 30th, 1962 in Portland, Maine, later growing up in Groveville, a quiet rural town outside of Portland. Growing up, he loved visiting the local drugstore with his comics rack, enjoying such books as Sergeant Rock, G.I. Combat, Weird War Tales, The Losers, and his personal favorite, Commandy, the last boy on Earth. His favorite artist was Jack Kirby, who created Commandy, and Eastman said it was both this comic and Kirby that inspired him to become a comic book artist himself. 200 miles away, another Kirby fan was also coming into his fandom. Peter Laird was born on January 27, 1954 in North Adams, Massachusetts, and as a young kid, also loved comic books and especially Jack Kirby, which he said what finally drew his interest to the medium. Laird later went to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, earning a degree in fine arts in 1975. He made a living as a freelance illustrator with the dream of one day becoming a comic book artist, working on fanzines like The Oracle. Meanwhile, Eastman was working in the lobster industry of Maine when he went to Amherst to visit his girlfriend at the time at the University of Massachusetts, deciding to get a job at the local supermarket chain Price Chopper so he could stay for a few months. In his spare time, Eastman continued to read and draw comic books, and one day he found a discarded copy of Scat, the Valley Cowards Gazette, an underground comic featuring local artists. He especially liked the cover, which was done by Peter Laird. Eastman had developed a taste for underground comics in his teenage years, especially the work of Richard Corbin, the noted heavy metal artist, and Von Boyd, the creator of Cheech Wizard character. And he took his portfolio to Scat for a job. When he got there, though, Eastman learned the publisher planned to cancel the magazine to focus on advertising instead. However, they did take one look at his portfolio and noticed Eastman's art resembled Laird's, so they agreed to introduce the two of them. They quickly became fast friends, especially when Eastman visited Laird's apartment and discovered sketches of Jack Kirby's Run of the Losers, one of their mutual favorite comics. They decided to work together as artists, loosely sketching alternate pages and passing them back and forth to refine the details, while also splitting the inking chores, creating a truly collaborative style that was equal part Eastman and Laird. However, Eastman had to move back to Maine to work in the lobster industry when his girlfriend's year at UMass ended, but he promised to keep in touch with Laird. As luck would have it, Peter Laird's own romantic life would push them back together as he met his future wife, Janine Atkins, in June of 1982 and became totally smitten, as he put it. Following her to Dover, New Hampshire, where she was going to the University of New Hampshire to get her master's degree. They shared a home with two roommates, and as luck would have it, Eastman was living in Ogonek, Maine at the time, which was just 20 minutes from Dover. By the summer of 1983, Eastman was invited to move in with Laird and Jean, and which he did on that Labor Day. Together again, Eastman and Laird decided to work together with the intention of becoming full-time comic book artists. They created Marad Studios, the name being an in-joke as they didn't have a studio at the time, just a living room in Laird's house, which they used. Their first creative effort was Fugitoid, a science fiction adventure series about Dr. Honeycutt, a scientist from the planet D'Honob, whose mind is transferred into a robot body. He is chased by General Blank, who wanted to use Honeycutt's transmat technology as a teleportation device for the Federation military to fight against the Triceraton Republic. Thus, he goes on the run and is dubbed Fugitoid, short for Fugitive Android. The comic was originally planned to be released in a poster comic format, in which the readers could assemble the comic to reveal a poster-sized panel, though that proved ineffectual. Unable to find a publisher, Eastman and Laird self-published the story in their comic Gobbledygook No. 1, which featured the first two chapters of Fugitoid, along with an 8-page portfolio of the far-out art of Peter Laird. There was also a 3-page story by Kevin Eastman and his uncle Quentin. Gobbledygook, like many independent comics starting out, was photocopied at a local comic book shop and then pages collected and hand-stapled by Eastman and Laird themselves. The first issue ran for 150 copies, with the second doing the same, featuring chapters 3 and 4 of Fugitoid and an 8-page Eastman story, Tale from the Wood, a 2-page I'm Only a Loser, and a 1-page Don't Sleep on Main Street. However, to this day, Eastman and Laird claim they still have copies of those comics, as according to Eastman, not a lot of people wanted a $1.50 self-published comic book back in 1984. Well, at least not that one. The comics would debut at Portsmouth Minicon in New Hampshire. It would be accompanied by a third comic of Eastman and Laird's, which they called the first real comic published in New Hampshire. It was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, number 1. Amazingly enough, it began as a joke between Eastman and Laird. On November of 1983, during one of their work sessions, Eastman drew a Ninja Turtle while they were working on Fugitoid as a laugh. Laird loved it and replied by drawing an even cooler one. Eastman countered again, and when Laird did another drawing after Eastman's, he added Teenage Mutant in front of the Ninja Turtles to the title. They both ended up doubling over in laughter, calling it the dumbest thing ever. Little did they know, as the idea stuck with them, and they decided to make it their next project after Fugitoid. For their new comic, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird would pay homage to their favorite comic book artists and books, notably Frank Miller's Ronin and Daredevil, along with Jack Kirby. The origin of the Turtles is even tied into Daredevil's, claiming that the same radioactive waste that gave Daredevil his powers also hit the Turtles, who were pets of a bystander residing inside a fishbowl. The canister had the initials TCRI. They were soon discovered by Splinter, the pet rat of ninja Hamato Yoshi, who was also hit by the goo. Yoshi had been killed by Oroku Saki, along with his love Tang Shin, who blamed Yoshi for the death of his brother Oroku Nagi. All of this was a nod to Stick, Daredevil's mentor who taught him martial arts, thus the name Splinter. Plus, Eastman and Laird figured a rat made sense in the sewers. Saki was the head of the Foot, another nod to the Daredevil, this time his rival ninja clan being the Hand, while he took on the guise of the Armored Shredder, which was inspired when Eastman looked at a cheese grater one day and imagined what it would be like to be if someone punched you with it. For the names, Laird uses Jansen's History of Art for the Renaissance artists' names, Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, and Michelangelo, who in the comic book was named by Splinter. They were differentiated by their weapons. Leo had a pair of katanas, Don had a bow, Ralph had a pair of sais, and Maki wielded a pair of nunchucks. One thing that wasn't different between the Turtles originally was the color of their masks, which were all red. Granted, it was a black and white comic at the time, so no one could really tell anyway. Of interesting note, Michelangelo was originally misspelled, with the first part being spelled Michael instead of the correct Michel. But considering he was named by a mutated rat, they figured it was understandable. As Eastman and Laird would say, Master Splinter was not a master speller. For the first issue, Eastman sketched the thumbnails, wrote the story, and choreographed the action for the 40-page comic. Laird then refined the script and the dialogue, with pages passed back and forth between the two for further refinement. For the comic's unique shading, they used duo shade paper, which was pretty expensive at $8 a sheet, but produced the desired look when the paper reacted to certain chemicals. To save money, Eastman and Laird managed to squeeze 3 comic pages out of one sheet, with little left over for spot illustrations. Because they had to squeeze so much image into each sheet, that's the reason the first comic's borders are so thin. They decided to self-publish from the outset due to the disappointment of Gobbledygook and the inspiration of other underground comics artists such as Dave Simocerebus and Richard Corbin. Eastman and Laird found a local printer in Dover, New Hampshire to produce a 3,000-issue run, with money pulled from Eastman's $500 tax return and $250 from Laird's savings, but they were still $1,300 short. Thankfully, Eastman's uncle Quentin, who sold art supplies, offered an interest-free loan, which allowed them to print the comic and even pay for some advertising, like in the Comics Buyer's Guide. A cover letter was sent out to 200 media outlets, along with 2 pages of art, from which they actually got a response. United Press International interviewed them at Laird's house, along with a number of local papers and the PBS affiliate of Dover, New Hampshire. The comic debuted at the Portsmouth Minicon on May 5, 1984 at the Howard Johnson's Motor Lodge. It was there that they met Steve and Darla Warren, the creators of the indie book The Survivors. At the con, Eastman and Laird managed to sell 100 to 150 of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1 for $1.50 apiece. A few hundred more were sold to wholesale to Richard D. Bernerno, the comics dealer who organized the convention. Eastman and Laird also wised up after the disappointing sales of Gobbledygook, learning to work with distributors, who bought the comics at a volume discount and then sold them to comic book stores nationwide. The birth of comic book stores, or the direct market, was a boon to independent publishers, as the magazine stands and newspaper racks were already filled with books from the big publishers like DC, Marvel, and Archie. However, specialty comic book stores had a lot more space to fill, thus giving a venue for companies like Mirage and comics like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The publicity push by Eastman and Laird also started to pay off as attention was being paid to this new comic. Laird joked it was because of the crazy title, but pretty soon comic shops couldn't keep it in stock, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1 sold out by the end of the month. As a result, Eastman's uncle Quentin was paid back in full, while they had enough left for a second printing of 6,000 issues, which promptly sold out as well. Despite this early success, Eastman still had to go back to cooking lobsters, though calls kept coming in for more Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, so he and Laird immediately went to work on issue #2 for a fall 1984 release. The pre-orders were already 15,000 issues, and when sold, amounted to $2,000 profit for Eastman and Laird apiece. They soon realized if they could produce 6 issues a year at that rate, they could live their dream of being full-time comic book artists. By January of 1985, that dream was achieved, but they, along with the Turtles, were in no way stopping. By October of 1984, the second issue was released, which introduced lab tech April O'Neil, who worked for scientist Baxter Stockman. Stockman had invented a Mauser robot originally designed to kill rats, but instead used it to turn to crime. In the issue, the Turtles thwarted Stockman's plan while also saving April, who discovered the plot. In March of 1985, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #3 was released, this time with 50,000 pre-orders. It was only second in sales behind ElfQuest in the self-published direct market. This continued the Mauser storyline, and when Splinter disappeared, with the Turtles vowing to find them. Eastman and Laird then chose to follow with 4 one-shot issues, each focusing on a separate turtle, and then released a Raphael micro-series in April of 1985, which also introduced the crazed hockey mask-wearing vigilante Casey Jones. Like the rest of the Ninja Turtles, he was designed as a parody, this time mocking the 80s action heroes of the time. The new demand put pressure on Eastman and Laird, who found themselves missing deadlines, thus they decided to stick to a bi-monthly schedule. It didn't help that TM Ninja Turtles was a 40 pages an issue when the industry standard at the time was 24. With the 4th issue, they introduced the brain-like looking aliens, Ultrums, along with the origin of the ooze that mutated the Turtles, discovering the initials on the canister stood for Techno Cosmic Research Institute. With this introduction of the aliens, Eastman and Laird were also able to work in their original creation Fugitoid into the larger Turtles universe. Shared universe has always been a thing. As a result, Eastman and Laird reprinted Fugitoid's original adventures, including his ones with the Turtles in Fugitoid #1. With all this success, Mirage was expanded to an actual studio in Northampton, Massachusetts, which also included living quarters for themselves. Eastman and Laird then hired Steve Levin, a Westbrook High School classmate of Kevin Eastman's, as a letterer with issue #5, along with giving him other offers work. According to Levin, he informed Eastman he never lettered a comic before, and he didn't know how, but after Eastman showed him the basics, he was hired on. The company also had their first merchandise tie-in with iron-on transfer stickers and buttons. They then licensed the Turtles to Dark Horse Miniatures, no relation to the comic book company, who produced lead figurines of characters, which were sold via role-playing shops or direct mail order. Then, an actual tabletop role-playing game was produced by Kevin Sabindier, co-founder and president of Paladinium Books. This merchandising venture proved successful in both areas, as fans of the game went to the comic stores to read the book, while comic fans went to role-playing stores to play the game. Eastman and Laird created the cover art along with spot illustrations for the book, which included Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the Other Strangeness, with some characters created specifically for this. It would later include Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Adventures, Trucking Turtles, Turtles Go to Hollywood, Transdimensional Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Guide to the Universe. Mirage kept expanding, with Ryan Brown brought on from Cleveland, Ohio to assist with the art and production in 1985, and then in early 1986, Jim Lawson was brought on as inker. He had previously did Prime Slime Tales, one of the first non-Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle books that Mirage published. With issue #9, which came out in September of 1986, it focused on the Turtles' preteen adventures, titled The Passing. The art was done by Michael Dooney, who previously did Gizmo for Mirage, with Eastman and Laird providing the writing. Brown and Lawson inked, and Levin lettered. Simply put, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was no longer a two-man job, and Mirage was now an actual full-blown studio. With the demand for the back issues picking up, First Comics was hired to reprint and publish them with corrections by Eastman and Laird, along with new covers. In addition, the comics were colorized, revealing they all wore red masks. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles line expanded as well with Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which was added in May of 1987 by Ryan Brown and Jim Lawson. And in this series, Leatherhead, the Rat King, Complete Carnage, and Radical were introduced, further expanding the Turtles universe. Though the first volume would only last 7 issues until 1989. At this point, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was selling 100,000 copies an issue, well past the point of Eastman and Laird could be professional comic book artists, and they were about to go even further when Mark Friedman, a licensing agent, came into their lives to ultimately change it and the Turtles forever. Mark Friedman got his start in licensing with Leisure Concepts International, LCI, after college, a licensing company that specialized in toys and action figures. He had previously worked with Stan Weston, who helped develop the G.I. Joe toy line and later worked on Buck Rogers and Low Ranger toys, along with giving Friedman much-needed insight on the industry. Friedman then worked with Taft Merchandising Group, who developed characters owned by Hanna-Barbera and Ruby Spears, thus working on properties like the Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, and Yogi Bear, along with gaining first-hand experience in developing new cartoons. This led to a high-level position at Mode Productions, where he worked in the Alvin and the Chipmunks cartoon for NBC. Finally, when Alvin started to slow down, Mark Friedman decided to set out on his own and form his own agency, while still doing freelance work for other companies such as Harmony Gold and the Robotech line. During this time, Friedman would spend time at gaming stores looking for new properties, noticing how well developed the stories and the characters were in them. Through this and his freelance clients, he met Kevin Simbibadi of Paladinium Books, who told him about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Friedman checked out the comic, getting Rick Obadiah at First Comics to send him a copy of the collector's edition. As soon as he saw Eastman's drawing on the back cover, Friedman decided it had all the ingredients for a hit. The problem was first getting a hold of Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, as they had recently moved and not even Kevin Simbibadi didn't know where to send them their royalty check for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the Other Strangeness. Once Friedman found them in Northampton, he put on his best suit and had to rent a car as his wife needed theirs to take care of the baby. For Eastman and Laird's part, they greeted Friedman in shorts and covered in paint, as they were renovating their studio at the time. Upon meeting, Friedman explained to Eastman and Laird that creation had all the elements of it for success. They were intrigued as Friedman pitched his experience working on the highly successful G.I. Joe and He-Man toy lines, but were still a bit hesitant, so they gave him 30 days to come up with something. Friedman immediately commissioned former Muppeteer Tony Basilato, who also previously done a comic for Mirage Prime Slime Tales, to build 2 large, near child-sized foam models of the Turtles to pitch to toy companies. Friedman also sought out the home video market to make a cartoon, as this was a time when every toy line had a cartoon tie-in to it. A comic book just wasn't enough, especially an independent one. When Friedman pitched to Mattel, they called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles ridiculous. He still claims to have the letter in which they stated that, while LGN turned it down despite liking the concept, and Hasbro was just too busy with all their other properties. Running out of options and 30 days running out, Friedman called a friend, Richard Salas, at Playmate Toys and sent him a Turtles model via FedEx. Friedman kept calling Salas to check if he received the model. When he finally did, Salas called back, exclaiming, "This is great!" "What is it?" Friedman explained the concept and pitched to the president of Playmates in early fall of 1986. He was accompanied by Eastman and Laird to meet Salas and Bill Carson. However, Playmate had no experience with action figures at this point, but co-owner Thomas Chan gave them the green light, thanks to the enthusiastic pitch by Friedman, Eastman, and Laird. With a deal in place by December of 1986, Playmate was set to develop toys based on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Thus, Mark Friedman's new one-man company, Sherge Licensing, had his first client, Mirage Studios. One of the first things Mark Friedman had to work on was toning the Turtles down, as the original comic was pretty violent. They killed and maimed the foot soldiers and the Shredder, while the ninjas themselves were historically paid assassins. So far, not something that would sell to kids as a cartoon or a toy line. Friedman planned to play up the humor while keeping just enough action to keep it cool and exciting. Friedman also worked to get a 5-episode pilot with International Video Entertainment and Rona Wallace. He went to Jerry Sachs of the ad agency Sachs and Finley, who also represented Penlight Toys. Through him, Friedman met Fred Wolf of Gukami, Wolf and Swanson Studios, who was in the middle of their first season of DuckTales, the Disney cartoon series inspired by Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge from the comic book legend Carl Banks. I will get to him in the future. Jerry Sachs and Richard Salas gave Wolf a pair of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comics and asked if he could make a show of it. Wolf said you can make a cartoon out of anything, but he was a little worried about the title, which he thought was a bit too wild, something that he admits is a bit ironic today. As part of developing the cartoon, they added the initials of each turtle's name to their belt buckles to tell them apart, along with giving them different colored masks. In the comics, they all wore red, remember? Leo wore blue, Don got purple, Mikey got orange, while Raphael got to keep the red. David Weiss, the prolific writer who worked on He-Man and Transformers, was brought on, having been referred to by then animation writer Chuck Lorre, the now famed TV producer that such modern-day hits as Two and a Half Men and The Big Bang Theory. Lorre did also help out with another major contribution with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles show by co-writing the theme song with D.C. Brown. Another change from the comic to the cartoon was making April O'Neil a reporter over being a lab tech, modeling her after Lois Lane from Superman. She now served the same role as Lois did, as being a reporter gave her an excuse to be in the dangerous situations, while also making her a damsel in distress. Further adapting the show for the kids, the Foot Clan ninjas were now robots, thus allowing the Turtles to go all out with their weapons, and David Weiss invented the alien Krang, who resembled the Ultrams from the comic, from Dimension X, who backed the Shredder and his Foot Clan, making them into the big bads of the series. They set out to give each turtle a distinctive personality, as Fred Wolf's experience with DuckTales made him realize that no one could tell Huey, Dewey, and Louie apart, despite wearing different colored outfits. The modern-day DuckTales cartoon has fixed that. Leo was made the leader straight arrow, Don the brain/nerd, Ralph the angry rude one, and Mikey the fun-loving teenage one. Originally, only Michelangelo was meant to say cowabunga, but it was soon adopted by the whole crew, becoming the team's catchphrase. They also changed the ooze, now called mutagen, for the cartoon, stating it worked by changing a creature into the last thing they came into contact with. Thus, the turtles were touched by a human, thus becoming half human. As a result, Splinter was now Hamato Yoshi instead of being his pet rat, and the mutagen turned him into a half human, half rat when he interacted with one. This did create a nice moral dilemma for the show, as whenever a cure is sought out for Splinter to be made fully human again, it can also be used to turn the turtles back to normal turtles as well, something the original pilot would use. Another addition for the cartoon that is now a hallmark with the Turtles was their love of pizza, which David Weiss added because he figured, well, teenagers love pizza, so why not? Though the Turtles would add crazy toppings with theirs, especially Michelangelo, who loved everything from anchovies, jelly beans, clams, and peanut butter with his pizza. And you thought the Hawaiians were pizza with pineapple. Back in the toy front, Playmates developed alongside the cartoon, crafting the classic Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles logo that would both the show and toy line would carry. John Handy at the Playmates was tasked veteran toy designer Steve Varner to sculpt the turtle toys, which were to be released in 1988. Another prominent toy designer, Scott Hensley, was brought on, designing the Shredder, Bebop, and Rocksteady. He liked doing the villains. Bebop and Rocksteady were created at the request of Playmates, who wanted additional mutants as action figures. Thus, Peter Laird designed them, while David Weiss came up with the origin and the backgrounds. Hensley made a point to make the villains crouch in their poses so they wouldn't be taller than the Turtles, which the marketing department insisted upon. Roger Boggs also did the final sculpt in Rocksteady. David Weiss developed the origins of Bebop and Rocksteady, who were made to be the comic relief of the TV show. In addition to the figures, vehicles were also created: the Cheapskate, the Turtle Blimp, the Turtle Trooper, and the Foot Knucklehead. For the cartoon, it was meant to be an action show with comedy added, and Sue Blue was hired to cast the series by Sax Finley, going over Fred Wolf's head. He originally was insulted by this, but once he heard the first recordings by the cast, he found them superb. A veteran voice actress herself, probably Sue Blue is most known as RC in the Transformers the movie. The cast she assembled ended up making Michelangelo a surfer dude voiced by Townsend Coleman, despite Wolf wanting him to sound more like Street, which does appear in the first episode when Mikey says, "chill out." Other veteran voice actors like Rob Paulson was hired to do Raphael. Fred Wolf would oversaw every episode after the second, though Eastman and Laird felt ignored by the showrunners, who were taking it in a different direction than they intended. They were able to shoot down some goofier ideas, such as in the Turtles kicking the Shredder and Crane out of the Technodrome in the end to make it their home. The famed Japanese animation studio Toei was contracted to animate the miniseries and was noted for using the more talented A-Team for it over the B-Team, which previously did the anime series Galaxy Express 999 and Space Battleship Yamato, also called Star Blazer in America. This was a rare exception, as Toei was a studio in Japan who usually had their B-Team handle the foreign contracts, while the A-Team did the local Japanese anime. As a result, the animation is notably higher quality for the first miniseries. Jerry Sachs handled the marketing for for a December 28, 1987 release, which would air Monday through Friday during the Christmas holidays. He managed to get TV Guide and People magazine to write about it, and even sports writer Mike Lupica called it his favorite new show of 1998. However, the cartoon series did face controversy overseas, especially with the word ninja. The historical reference did come back to bite him in the end, along with Mike using nunchucks, which is frowned on in the UK and other countries. As a result, the show was retitled Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles for foreign markets and had the action heavily edited. It would be decades before they got the original version of the cartoons. The toys were set for a summer 1988 launch, though surprisingly, Playmate wouldn't commission more cartoons despite the success of the miniseries. Fred saw a chance, though, and arranged a deal for ownership of the miniseries from Saks Findlay, who didn't commission another 13 episodes. Getting the funding was tricky, with Wolf finally going to Group W, the TV division of Westinghouse, for financing. All three of the networks turned it down, though Wolf did have offers from overseas, specifically the UK, Australia, and New Zealand markets. Group W did express interest in distributing the show through syndication. However, they would have to reduce the cost of the show by $1 million, which Wolf agreed to, using his other business deals to subsidize the Turtles show to make up the difference. On October 1st, 1988, the new episodes aired with Return of the Shredder, detailing how he and Krang escaped the Mission X after being marooned there at the end of the miniseries. It was so successful, CBS, one of the networks that first turned down Wolf and the Turtle cartoon. This franchise has a history of being overlooked. Immediately ordered 26 more episodes for their Saturday morning cartoon lineup, an unheard of order at the time. The third season aired in fall of 1989, bringing the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to the magic number of 65 episodes for syndication. Thus allowed the stations to run each episode 4 times a year on a Monday through Friday schedule. Meanwhile, despite some toy stores, KB would be the first to make the jump. Being hesitant to carry the Turtles' toys, they quickly sold out. Simply put, the Turtles just exploded under the world, and they weren't stopping. Back in the comic front, issue number 11 came out, which would be the last full-on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic by original creators Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. After this, other artists would take over, while Eastman and Laird focused on other stories in the larger business of Mirage. The stresses of running Mirage was putting a strain on Eastman and Laird's relationship, too, as they were no longer just making a comic, but approving cartoon scripts, toy deals, licenses, and so forth, and started not to see eye to eye. As a break from working together so much, Eastman and Laird agreed to script alternate issues while also providing profit share to their artists and studios for licensing. Eastman and Laird soon became heroes in the comic book industry, as their success inspired other artists to follow suit. Even Richard Corbin, one of the original heroes, who credited them for the onslaught of independent artists making the jump. They even got to meet their hero, Jack Kirby, at the San Diego Comic-Con in 1985, where Eastman bought the original art cover of Commandy number 19, while Laird got the cover of The Demon number 3. Among the new comics Mirage produced was A Rip in Time by Bruce Jones and Richard Corbin. The tie-in with the cartoon, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Adventures, was created as an all-ages book. The original still had the Turtles killing and maiming people, after all. With Michael Dooney was hired to write the first 3 issues, with David Garcia inking. To distribute the comic, Mirage chose Archie Comics over Marvel and DC, who were given approval rights over the content due to the family nature of the company. Its co-founder, John Goldwater, was the infamous head of the CMAA and its notorious CCA. The first miniseries of Adventures ran from August to October of 1988, ending up being a huge success, and thus it was made ongoing in the spring of 1989. With the first 4 issues of this run adapting the cartoon. However, the series would soon fall behind schedule due to not having a full creative team, so Ryan Brown was put in charge with Stephen Murphy. He was best known for the adult-oriented The Puma Blues, so he wrote under the pen name Dean Claren, an anagram of the woman he was dating at the time. Ken Mitch Rooney, the creator of the indie comic Mythic Adventures, was made regular penciler with Jim Lawson, who alternated issues between the two. For its part, Archie remains hands-off, despite their rights to disapprove content, and the series soon became their best-selling comic. As a further tie-in, Man Ray was created for the comics by Ryan Brown and will be used for the Ralston Purina Turtle cereal, mini books that came with the breakfast cereal. He was inspired by the Puma Blues character and Stephen Murphy, for whom Man Ray's personality was based on. Adventures would also introduce characters like Cuddly the Cowlick, Sting and Sling, Crying Hound, Wing Rat, and Screwloose, along with Cherub, Trope, Malinga, Sons of Silence, Jaguar, Dreadmen, Cod Terra, Null, Skull and Bean, Belly Bomb, Ninjara, and Catmundo, among others. As you can see, the cartoon and the comic tie-in was much more kiddie-friendly. And with that, we will leave you for now, but the Turtles will continue to explode further into multiple mediums, including live-action movies. And now it is July 17th, 2025, time for the favorite comic of the week. Absolute Batman, number 10 by Scott Snyder and Nick Dragotta, which picks up with the cliffhanger from last issue in which Batman's been captured by Bane and placed in the Arkham Asylum or medical facility. It's a little different in the Absolute Universe, where he's essentially having his spirit broken and some pretty horrific experiments are being put on him. Snyder pulls no punches with this issue and showing that the limits of the Absolute Universe, like this is a Bruce Wayne that's really getting put through the ringer. And we get into some real body horror here, especially when you see exactly what they end up doing to him. And it's shown by Dragotta's gorgeous art, which is very creepy. It really shows Arkham is almost a hell on earth kind of place, and Batman's stuck in the middle of it. And it's just pretty torturous, but you kind of get Batman as lowest, so that you can see him fight back his way back next issue. So hopefully he does, because man, they put him through the ringer. I've never seen any kind of Batman put through like this. So it's just a great read in general, and really a demonstration of how great the Absolute Universe is, because they can really push these characters in directions that the normal DC line can't do. So with that, that's the conclusion of this first part of the archive edition of the history of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Join me again next week for the second part of the archive edition. Still working on the new episodes, but let's come and go. Here we go. We're getting there. But until then, go out and enjoy some good comic book. And yeah, definitely check out In the Absolute Universe from DC, especially Batman. It's just killing it right now.